Stop begging for love. Stop standing in front of somebody hoping they'll finally see your worth like it's hidden somewhere behind your silence, your patience, your sacrifices. Love is not something you convince someone to give you. Love is something they recognize in you without negotiation. And the moment you find yourself explaining your value to someone who keeps overlooking it, you've already stepped into a losing position. See, the problem isn't that you don't have enough to offer. The problem is you've been offering it to people who never had the capacity to appreciate it. You've been pouring into cups that were never meant to hold what you bring to the table. And instead of pulling your energy back, you start giving more time, more understanding, more chances. You think if you just prove yourself a little harder, love will finally show up the way you want it to. But that's not how this works. The moment you start begging for love, you lower your standards without even realizing it. You start accepting behavior you once said you would never tolerate. You start making excuses for inconsistency. You start calling disrespect miscommunication and neglect they're just busy. And little by little, you move further away from the version of yourself that knew exactly what you deserved. Standards are not about being difficult. Standards are about being clear. They are about knowing what aligns with your peace and what doesn't. They're about deciding ahead of time what kind of treatment is non-negotiable in your life. Because if you don't decide your standards, life will decide them for you through the people you allow to stay. Let me tell you something. People don't rise to your expectations when you don't enforce them. They rise to what you tolerate. If you tolerate being ignored, they will ignore you. If you tolerate broken promises, they will keep breaking them. If you tolerate half effort, they will never give you full effort. They will never give you full effort. Not because they're evil, but because you showed them that this level is enough to keep you around. And now you're frustrated, confused, wondering why they won't step up. But you trained them not to. When you start setting standards, everything changes. Not because people suddenly become better, but because the wrong people remove themselves. They can't meet you at that level, so they fall off. And that's not a loss. That's alignment. That's space being cleared for someone who doesn't see your standards as pressure, but as normal. You have to understand that real love does not require constant negotiation. It doesn't feel like you're fighting to be seen. It doesn't feel like you're competing for attention. It doesn't leave you questioning where you stand every single day. Real love meets you with consistency. It meets you with clarity. It meets you with effort that doesn't need to be begged for. But you'll never experience that if you keep entertaining what falls below your standards. There's a difference between patience and self-neglect. Patience is giving something time to grow when it shows potential. Self-neglect is staying in something that keeps showing you it won't change. And too many people confuse the two. They think holding on longer will magically transform the situation. They think love is about endurance, about proven loyalty, about how much they can tolerate. Love is not a test of how much pain you can handle. When you set standards, you're not pushing love away. You're protecting it. You're making sure that when love comes into your life, it has the right environment to grow. Because without standards, you accept chaos. And chaos doesn't build anything lasting. It only drains you. And let's be real, setting standards is uncomfortable. It means saying no when you're used to, saying yes. It means walking away when you would rather stay. It means choosing yourself in moments where you're afraid of being alone. But discomfort is part of growth. You cannot evolve into a higher version of yourself while holding on to habits that keep you small. You have to get to a point where your self-respect is louder than your fear of losing someone. Because if keeping someone requires you to lose yourself, that was never a win to begin with. The right person will not be intimidated by your standards. They will be aligned with them. They won't see your boundaries as walls. They will see them as clarity. They won't ask you to lower your expectations. They will naturally meet them because that's who they are, not because you forced them to be. But you've got to believe you deserve that first. Because if deep down you feel like you have to earn love, you will always settle for less than what you're worth. You will always feel like you have to prove something. And that mindset will keep attracting situations where you're undervalued. You don't earn love by suffering for it. You don't earn love by shrinking yourself to make someone else comfortable. You don't earn love by accepting crumbs and calling it a meal. You experience real love by standing firm in who you are and what you require and refusing to compromise on that for temporary connection. So stop begging. Stop chasing validation from people who are inconsistent with their presence. Stop trying to decode mixed signals like they mean something deeper. Mixed signals are a clear message. They mean you're not a priority, and your standards should never allow you to stay where you are treated like an option. You have to move differently. You have to start evaluating people not by their words, but by their actions, not by their potential, but by their patterns, because patterns don't lie. Patterns show you exactly what you can expect if you stay. And once you see that, you have a choice. You can either keep hoping they change, or you can choose yourself and walk away from anything that doesn't meet your standards. That choice will define your future. Confusion is not chemistry. Stop telling yourself that the butterflies in your stomach are a sign that something deep is happening. Sometimes those butterflies are just anxiety trying to warn you that something isn't right. You call it excitement, you call it a spark, you call it something special. But what you're really feeling is uncertainty. And uncertainty is not the foundation of anything real. See, real chemistry doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't have you staring at your phone, rereading messages, trying to figure out what they meant. It doesn't make you question where you stand or whether they actually care. That kind of confusion is not romantic, it's exhausting. And the more you normalize it, the more you train yourself to associate emotional instability with love. You meet someone, and in the beginning, everything feels intense. They come in strong. They say all the right things. They give you attention that feels almost too good to be true. And then suddenly, that energy shifts. They pull back. They become distant. They start moving differently. Now you're left trying to figure out what changed. And instead of stepping back and recognizing the inconsistency, you lean in harder. You start chasing that initial feeling like it's something you need to get back. That right there is where confusion disguises itself as chemistry. You think, maybe if I just give it a little more time, or maybe they're going through something, or maybe I did something, or maybe I did something wrong. And now you've created a story in your head that keeps you attached to someone who has already shown you they're not consistent. You're no longer dealing with reality. You're dealing with potential. And potential will keep you stuck longer than anything else. Real chemistry is steady. It's not about constant highs and lows. It's not about emotional roller coasters that leave you drained. It's about feeling secure in someone's presence. It's about knowing without having to ask that they are genuinely interested in you. There's a calmness to it. There's a clarity to it. You don't have to force it And you definitely don't have to question it every 5 minutes. But many people have been conditioned to think that love is supposed to feel chaotic. They believe if it's not intense, if it's not dramatic, if it's not a little confusing, then it must not be real. And that belief leads them straight into situations where they are constantly trying to earn stability from someone who thrives on inconsistency. You've got to break that pattern, because when someone is right for you, they don't make you feel like you're in competition with their attention. You're not fighting for a response. You're not wondering if they're going to disappear. You're not analyzing every interaction like it's a puzzle you need to solve. Everything flows in a way that makes sense. And when something makes sense, it doesn't create confusion. Now, let's be honest. Sometimes confusion feels exciting. There's a thrill in not knowing what's going to happen next. There's a rush in trying to figure someone out. It keeps you engaged. It keeps you thinking about them. It keeps you emotionally invested. But that's not love. That's emotional instability. Try creating a loop that's hard to break. And the longer you stay in that loop, the more you lose touch with what healthy actually looks like. You start thinking inconsistency is normal. You start believing that being unsure is just part of the process. You start lowering your expectations because you don't want to lose the connection, even if that connection is built on confusion. And now, instead of asking for clarity, you accept ambiguity. Clarity is not too much to ask for. Consistency is not too much to ask for. Consistency is not too much to expect. Effort is not something you should have to beg for. When someone truly values you, they don't leave room for constant doubt. Their actions match their words. Their presence is reliable. Their intentions are clear. If you have to constantly question it, it's not what you think it is. Pay attention to patterns, not moments. Anybody can show up one day and make you feel special. Anybody can say the right things in the right moment. But consistency is what reveals truth. Consistency is what separates real interest from temporary attention. And if someone can't maintain that consistency, then what you're dealing with is not chemistry. It's inconsistency dressed up as something meaningful. You got to stop romanticizing confusion. Stop telling yourself that mixed signals are part of the journey. They're not. They're a sign that something is off. They're a sign that the connection is not aligned. And the longer you ignore that, the deeper you get pulled into something that will never give you the clarity you deserve. When you start valuing peace over excitement, everything shifts. You no longer chase the highs because you recognize the cost of the lows. You no longer entertain people who bring chaos into your life because you understand that real connection doesn't require confusion to feel alive. It's okay for something to feel calm. It's okay for something to feel certain. It's okay to not be on edge all the time, wondering what's next. That's not boring. That's healthy. That's what allows something real to actually grow without being constantly disrupted by doubt and inconsistency. And here's the truth a lot of people avoid. The reason confusion holds so much power is because it keeps hope alive. As long as you're confused, there's still a part of you that believes things could turn around. There's still a part of you that's waiting for clarity, waiting for things to make sense, waiting for them to finally show up the way you want them to. But clarity doesn't come from waiting. It comes from observing. When you see someone's actions clearly, without trying to justify them, without trying to rewrite the narrative, you start to understand exactly what's in front of you. And once you understand that, you can no longer pretend that confusion is something deeper than what it really is. It's a warning sign. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. That's not just a saying, that's a pattern that shows up in every relationship you've ever had. Every time you let some slide that didn't sit right with your spirit, every time you stayed quiet when you should have spoken up, every time you gave another chance after a clear sign of disrespect, you were setting a standard, not the one you say out loud, but the one you live by. People don't just wake up one day and decide how they're going to treat you out of nowhere. They learn from your reactions. They study what you accept. They notice what you ignore. And over time, they adjust their behavior to match the level you've allowed. And now, boy, if there are no consequences for crossing your boundaries, then in their mind, there are no real boundaries. And now you're sitting there wondering why things keep repeating. Why the same type of behavior keeps showing up in different people. Why you keep feeling overlooked, undervalued, or taken for granted. It's not always about who you're choosing. It's also about what you're allowing once they're in your life. You can't say you want respect, but keep entertaining disrespect. You can't say you value honesty, but stay in situations where lies keep surfacing. You can't say you deserve consistency, but continue to give your time to someone who only shows up when it's convenient for them. Your actions have to match your standards, or your standards mean nothing. A lot of people struggle with this because they don't want to lose the connection. They think if they speak up, if they enforce a boundary, if they actually stand firm on what they said they require, the other person might leave. So they choose silence. They choose comfort over clarity. They choose temporary peace over long-term respect. But what kind of peace is that, really? Because now you're holding everything in, you're letting things build up, you're pretending things are okay when they're not. And eventually, that silence turns into frustration. That frustration turns into resentment. And that resentment starts to change how you show up in the relationship. You become distant, irritated, emotionally drained, and the other person doesn't even understand why. Because from their perspective, everything has been acceptable this whole time. You train them to believe that. Boundaries are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They're about controlling your response to it. You can't stop someone from being inconsistent, disrespectful, or careless. But you can decide what you're going to do when they show you those traits. You can decide whether that behavior aligns with your standards or not. And if it doesn't, you can remove yourself from the situation instead of trying to fix them. That's where people get it twisted. They think setting a boundary means arguing, explaining, convincing someone to change. It doesn't. A real boundary is quiet. It's firm. It doesn't need a long speech. It shows up in your actions. It shows up in what you no longer tolerate, what you no longer respond to, what you no longer make excuses for. If someone keeps canceling on you last minute, your boundary isn't to beg them to value your time. Your boundary is to stop making yourself available to someone who doesn't respect it. If someone keeps speaking to you in a way that feels disrespectful, your boundary isn't to argue every time it happens. Your boundary is to step back and remove access until they understand that behavior doesn't work with you. And here's the part people don't like. When you start enforcing boundaries, some people will test you. They push back. They act like you've changed. They say you're being difficult, too sensitive, too much. Not because you're wrong, but because they were comfortable with the version of you that allowed everything. Growth will always feel uncomfortable to people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. You gotta be okay with that. Because the alternative is staying in cycles that drain you. The alternative is continuing to feel like you're not being treated the way you deserve while doing nothing to change the pattern. And patterns don't break on their own. They break when you decide to respond differently. Consistency in your boundaries is what teaches people that you're serious. Not once, not twice, but every single time. If you enforce a boundary one day and ignore it the next, you create confusion. You send mixed signals, and mixed signals don't create respect. They create loopholes. People start thinking, maybe it's not that serious. Maybe I can get away with it this time. And before you know it, you're right back in the same situation you said you were done with. You have to be solid in your decisions. And let's talk about self-worth, because this is where it all connects. The reason you tolerate certain behavior is often tied to what you believe you deserve. If deep down you feel like you're lucky to have someone, you'll accept things you shouldn't. If you feel like you can't do better, you'll hold on longer than you need to. If you're afraid of being alone, you'll make room for people who bring chaos into your life. But when you truly understand your value, your tolerance level changes. You don't have to convince yourself to walk away from disrespect. It becomes automatic. You don't have to debate whether something is acceptable. You already know it's not. And that clarity makes your boundaries stronger. It's not about being perfect. It's not about cutting people off at the first mistake. It's about recognizing patterns and deciding what aligns with your standards. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has flaws. But repeated behavior is a choice. And when someone keeps choosing the same behavior that disrespects you, you have to choose how you respond. You can either keep tolerating it and reinforcing the pattern, or you can break the cycle by changing your response. And that change starts with you. It starts with being honest about what you've been allowing. It starts with acknowledging the moments where you stayed quiet when you should have spoken up. It starts with recognizing that your tolerance has been teaching people how to treat you, whether you intended it or not. Once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you have a responsibility to yourself to move differently. The right one will never make you question your worth. Let that sink in, because too many people have normalized doubt in places where there should be clarity. You find yourself constantly wondering where you stand, replaying conversations in your head, analyzing tone, timing, and behavior, trying to piece together whether or not you actually matter to them. That is not love. That is insecurity being fed by inconsistency. When someone is right for you, their presence doesn't feel like a puzzle you have to solve. You're not guessing. You're not second-guessing yourself. You're not asking your friends to decode messages or justify behavior that doesn't feel right. There's a sense of knowing, not because everything is perfect, but because their actions consistently align with their words. You don't feel like you have to compete for their attention. You don't feel like you're one option among many. You don't feel like you have to earn basic respect, time, or affection. It's given freely, not because you demanded it, but because they genuinely want to show up for you. That kind of energy doesn't create confusion, it creates peace. But when you're dealing with the wrong person, everything feels uncertain. One day they are all in. The next day they're distant. One moment they make you feel special. The next moment you feel invisible. And that inconsistency starts to mess with your mind. You begin to question yourself. You wonder if you're asking for too much. You start shrinking your expectations just to keep the connection alive. That's how self-doubt begins to replace self-worth. You start thinking maybe you're the problem. Maybe you're too emotional. Maybe you're too available. Maybe you're not enough. And now, instead of evaluating whether this person is right for you, you're trying to adjust yourself to fit into a situation that was never meant to hold you properly in the first place. The wrong person will have you overthinking everything. The right person will have you understanding everything without needing an explanation every 5 minutes. That doesn't mean there won't be challenges. That doesn't mean there won't be disagreements. But even in those moments, there's still a foundation of respect, honesty, and effort that keeps things grounded. You don't lose yourself trying to hold it together. When someone values you, they make it known, not just through words, but through consistent action. They check in, they follow through, they show up. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you feel like your needs are a burden. They don't make you feel like asking for clarity is too much. And most importantly, they don't leave you questioning your place in their life. Because when someone knows they want you, they move with intention. There's no confusion in their direction. They're not halfway in. They're not testing the waters while keeping other options open. They choose you, and that choice is reflected in how they treat you daily. A lot of people stay in situations where they feel uncertain because they're holding on to moments instead of patterns. They remember the good times, the sweet words, the occasional effort, and they use those moments to justify staying. But moments don't define a relationship. Patterns do. If the pattern is inconsistency, emotional distance, lack of effort, or constant confusion, then that's the truth of what you're experiencing. Then that's the truth of what you're experiencing. Not the one good day, not the one deep conversation, not the one time they showed up the way you needed. The pattern is the reality. And once you start focusing on patterns, it becomes a lot harder to lie to yourself about what's really going on. You deserve a connection where you feel secure, not anxious, where you feel appreciated, not overlooked, where you feel chosen, not tolerated. And if you're not experiencing that, then you have to ask yourself why you're staying in something that continuously makes you question, your value. Because the truth is, the right person doesn't benefit from keeping you confused. They don't gain anything from making you feel unsure. That kind of behavior comes from people who are unsure themselves, people who are not ready, people who are not aligned with what you are looking for. And instead of accepting that reality, many people try to wait it out. They hope things will change. They believe that with enough time, enough patience, enough understanding, the situation will transform into something stable, but clarity doesn't come from waiting on someone to decide your worth. It comes from recognizing what someone's behavior already has. You can't build something solid with someone who is inconsistent in how they show up. You can't create security with someone who thrives in uncertainty. And you can't expect to feel valued by someone who doesn't consistently treat you like you matter. At some point, you have to stop asking, do they want me? And start asking, is this the kind of love I want to experience? Because those are two very different questions. One keeps you focused on them. The other brings the focus back to you. And when you bring the focus back to yourself, everything starts to shift. You begin to see things more clearly. You begin to recognize what aligns with your standards and what doesn't. You begin to understand that your worth is not something someone else gets to decide based on how they feel about you on any given day. Your worth is constant, whether they recognize it or not. And the moment you truly understand that, you stop settling for situations that make you question it.